Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Because it's Wednesday, that means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week, we're talking about a very important character. We're talking about Supergirl. It's Supergirl. I recently got this book. This is Supergirl, the Girl of Steel, which is a 620-page book full of the adventures of Supergirl. And I've never read most of the stories in this book. I have read the first one, though, and that's the one we're going to be talking about. The introduction of Supergirl when she arrived on the scene. She was one of many female superheroes who are based on male superheroes, which kind of points out how important Wonder Woman was, because she was definitely her own superhero who was successful. But there were an awful lot of female superheroes who were just the female versions of male superheroes. And part of that I think was for copyright reasons. But yeah, she was one of many of those. But she's proven to be very important, not just to Superman's mythos, but as a very important character in her own right in comic books. And this is her very first adventure. DC Comics has not always been kind to Supergirl. She's had her share of bad costumes, and she was even murdered in the 1980s. In this tragic tale, Crisis, John Byrne, the evil supervillain John Byrne, came in and murdered Supergirl because he was so dastardly that he wanted Superman to be the only Kryptonian who survived the destruction of Krypton, which was the way it was in the Superman comic books for a long time. But yeah, it was a pretty evil move by John Byrne and DC Comics. And it took years for Supergirl to come back. There was like this weird version of Supergirl that showed up in the 90s. I think it was in the 90s when that character showed up, who was another alien who became a kind of Supergirl. But it took a while for the real Supergirl to come back. Eventually she did. And she has a comic book here and there. Sometimes she'll have a comic book, then it'll get canceled, then it'll come back. Like most comic books nowadays. But she's been successful. She's been in the movies. I went and saw. I don't remember when that Supergirl movie came out, but I went to the theater to see the Supergirl movie, and I haven't seen it since. So it wasn't the best movie in the world, from what I remember. It wasn't the worst movie in the world, but it was not great. And then they had that TV show, which was successful, which I watched. I didn't watch all of it, but I saw my share of Supergirl episodes. That show was, not bad for a silly CW show. So it was CW, wasn't? I can't remember, but it was, it was one of those shows. It was okay. Had Lena Luthor in it. That made it worth it. But today we're going to be talking about Supergirl's very first appearance. I'm actually going to break out this Action Comics, 80 years of Action Comics, because she was a pretty big part of Action Comics, and this is a little bigger. So this is the cover, which has become a very iconic cover for Action Comics, where Supergirl bursts out of the rocket. Now, she did show up earlier in an advertisement, which is republished in this book, which has that same illustration. Basically, it's a little different, but it's the same idea. So that's the advertisement. Advertising the Girl of Steel, because you demanded it. You demanded it, and now you're getting it. Supergirl. And Superman, of course, can't believe his eyes. Great guns, a girl flying. It, must be an illusion. Look again, Superman. It's me, Supergirl, and I have all your powers. So Supergirl in the Supergirl from Krypton. Is she friend or foe. And frankly, in these old Superman comics, it could have gone either way. But of course, she was a friend. She was the real deal. And here we have the Supergirl from Krypton, and Superman's just hanging out one day, and he hears out in the distance, great guns, a guided missile. Is about to crash. There's a human passenger in it. This is a job for Superman. So Superman sees this missile, which is actually a rocket, come crashing down, and he knows, the only reason I survived my crash in the rocket that I was transported to Earth to was because I was Super Baby. He was Super Baby. But he thinks, man, if there's a human in there, they're a goner. But he's like, that rocket does look like the one that sent me from Krypton, but that's impossible. But it's not, because out of the rocket comes this young lady, this teenager, in a costume very much like Superman's. And he's all freaked out. Don't worry, Superman, I'm alive without a scratch. Great Scott, a young girl, unharmed. But that means you're invulnerable, like me. It's all a mystery. Why not, Superman? I'm also from the planet Krypton. And he's like, what? Planet Krypton was blown up years ago. What are you talking about? That's impossible. I was the only survivor when Krypton exploded. Besides, you weren't even born at the time. What are you talking about, you crazy lunatic? And she says, baffled, Superman? Let me tell you my story. As my parents told it to me, when Krypton blew up, you were not the only one to escape alive. Now, this is pretty incredible information. Now, for years and years, Superman was more or less the last son of Krypton. But, there was that city that was bottled, and, there was Kandor, with the miniaturized Kryptonian. So he's not really the last Kryptonian, but it's unusual. This is new information, and it was pretty startling. So what happened was, when the planet blew up, this big chunk of the planet flew off with a bunch of people on it. And somehow, in this version of the story, the first version of the story, it managed to blow off with an atmosphere. Like the atmosphere went with it. I don't understand this kind of science too much, but it must all be true. So apparently when a planet blows up, the chunks have their own atmosphere. So, the people on it are fine. The gravity is still there. Everything still works. So the people there are fine, except that the ground has been changed into kryptonite and is slowly killing them. So this great scientist, Zor-El, puts these lead sheets all over the ground, and that prevents the radiation from getting through and killing them. Zor-El is a great man. And so they build their own new civilization on this chunk of Krypton that is floating out in space. But Zor-El, he's always worried about disaster. So apparently he started building a rocket, and he was right to do so, because Zor-El, he gets married, he has a kid. These Kryptonians are living the best lives that they can, when all of a sudden they're hit by a terrible meteor shower. These meteors are flying down, and it's going to destroy their civilization. What's left of their Kryptonian civilization is going to be destroyed after all these years. And so Zor-El makes a rocket, or finishes the rocket that he started, so that he could put his teenage daughter in the rocket and rocket her away. And he knows where he's going to send her, because he's discovered the planet Earth, and he's discovered Superman. So he knows that if you send a Kryptonian to Earth, they're going to be super powered like Superman. He thinks that's cool. Now, this does lead to questions. Like, why does he make a rocket just big enough for one person? Is it because he didn't have enough time? Did he not have enough time to create a bigger rocket so that all three of them could go? I don't know. Why isn't everybody making rockets? I guess he's the only great scientist who can do it. But For whatever reason, there's just this one rocket that could fit one person, and of course it's going to be Kara Zor-El. And she's very upset because, as bad as this was for Superman, he was rocketed to Earth when he was a baby, so it was a little easier for him. But for Supergirl, this is like a real tragedy because her parents, and she's a teenager by this point, her parents are going to be killed and are killed. Everybody she's ever known on this little chunk of Krypton is getting destroyed. And then she's rocketed to Earth. But, the Superman comics at this time in the 1950s, they do balance all of the crazy hijinks that go on in these Silver Age comics with tragedy. Superman's story always has this level of tragedy to it because Superman lost his civilization, his entire heritage. All of that is gone, and he's very, very aware of it. Just as he's aware that he is different from everybody else on Earth, being the last person from Krypton. But now he's not. Now he's not the last person on Krypton. And they realize that they're related because she mentions his name, and he's like, what? Jor-El is my father. So your father Zor-El, I mean, they were brothers. We're cousins. So not only is there a new Kryptonian on Earth now, but it's a relative of Superman. And Superman is overjoyed because all this time, in a very real way, he's been alone. And she's happy too because, her entire family was slaughtered, and now she has, one person from her family who's still alive. So that's nice. But they have to figure out what they're going to do with Supergirl. Is she just going to go out and be a superhero all of a sudden? But he decides, you know what? You can't just go out and be a superhero. You've got to train for years to be a superhero. They didn't learn this over at Marvel Comics, but apparently you have to train to be a superhero. Like Superman did when he was Superboy as a kid. He spent a long time learning to be a superhero. So he's like, you know what? It's going to be a while before you can go out in public as Supergirl. You got to learn how to do this. And so we're going to come up with a secret identity for you. And you can't come live with me. No, that would be too... How am I going to explain that? You can't come live with me. I'm busy. I'm a reporter. How about we just send you to an orphanage? You're an orphan. We'll just send you to an orphanage. It'll be a good one. Don't worry. Oh, and you have to wear a wig all the time to disguise your hair because you have to wear a disguise. And so he has her wear a wig, which she has to wear all the time when she's not Supergirl, which is pretty much all the time. So she has a wig, and she gets a new name. She chooses the name for herself. He's like, you got to come up with a secret name. So she chooses Linda Lee. And he's like, that's as good as any, I suppose. And he's like, Lana Lang was my girlfriend when I was Superboy. And Lois Lane replaced her when I became Superman. By sheer coincidence, she picked the same initials, LL. It was sheer coincidence, Roger. Man, it's amazing how that happened. And so she's going to be basically Superman's secret weapon. She can't go public as Supergirl. Now, how this plays out, I don't know, because I haven't read most of the Supergirl stories. But at this point, this is pretty much the end of the story. She hasn't really done any superheroing yet. She goes out at night as Supergirl here, where no one can see her. But at this point, maybe DC Comics wasn't exactly sure what they're going to do with Supergirl. But they came out with a whole series of Supergirl stories. And apparently she kept more or less under wraps until Action Comics 285, where we have Supergirl revealed to the world, which is also republished in this volume, which looks awesome. That looks like an awesome story. For several years now, Supergirl has served Superman faithfully as his secret emergency weapon, often saving him from various dooms. This is true. Supergirl was always saving his ass. Superman has delayed announcing her existence on Earth until she sufficiently mastered her superpowers and proved herself capable of operating openly with him. Now, at last, the Girl of Steel's gallant efforts to prove her worth are rewarded. For finally, Superman lifts the veil of secrecy and makes known Supergirl's existence. So important is this development that we devoted an entire issue to it. It is pretty important. So that was interesting. That was interesting how they did that. And like I said, Supergirl has proven to be very durable and very important in comic books. I doubt DC Comics will murder her again, but you never know. Let's hope they do not. Fortunately, in comic books, no matter what you do nowadays can be undone. This is true. There are no lasting repercussions in comic books. But Supergirl deserves better than to be murdered, Roger, I think. And she's a fun character, and I look forward to reading more of her adventures in here because, like I said, I'd never had a chance to read them before. So I'll shut up now. I will catch you next time. Check out Steve Donoghue. He should have a video up later on today all about Supergirl. Yeah, I'll catch you next time.